Good afternoon, everybody. I want to welcome you here to Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show, a show dedicated to progressive rock and other forms of rock music. So it's Tuesday night. We now have two new shows on Tuesday night. One we did last week. The other one is going to start tonight. So this is a show that Ben has put together. He came up with this concept. Well, he didn't put it together, but he came up with the idea, gave me the idea, and I put it into a concept that I think works. Now, this one's going to be a little bit different because this is going to be a mini-series. We're going to do this as a mini-series. It'll be 6 episodes in total, going bi-weekly, so it'll take about 12 weeks to finish the last of the episodes. The show is going to be entitled Decades. So basically what it is that Ben has asked me to go decade by decade, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, or teens, or whatever you want to call it, and give my 10 favorite albums from those decades. So this decade, which we're doing tonight, is the 60s. So I've picked 10 albums out of 30. I made a list of 30 that I thought could possibly make this list. There could have been as many as 60 or 80, but I cut off the bottom half because I said to myself, these ones aren't going to make it anyways, so I'm not going to go view through them. And I brought it up to about 30, and then I narrowed it down to 10, my 10 favorite albums from the 1960s. Plus I've got some honorable mentions, which is probably almost as long as the 10 albums I picked. So these 10 albums, coincidentally, I happen to own all 10 of them. So we're going to do this in the same fashion that I normally do any kind of countdown or ranking or of any kind. I usually do this the same way. And it's not that I'm doing anything unusual. Most channels that do this kind of show, rock and roll content shows or rock and roll discussion type shows, do this pretty much the same way. So I'm going to give you my least favorite first and then go down to my most favorite last, or least to first, or worst to first, or 10th to first, whatever you want to call it. That's how I'm going to do it. So they're, in some ways, they're ranked according to how I like them. The 70s will be fairly easy because mostly all of my favorite albums come from the 70s. But the 60s have a fair amount of albums. Most of these albums, I would have to say, a good chunk of them, maybe as many as half, are albums that I've discovered since I started on this, doing this channel. Some of the other ones have been around for a long time, but pretty much that's how it's come down. So I'm going to give you my 10. The only limitation here will be that I will not do any more than 2 albums per band, and that will go across all of the decade episodes, all 6 of them. So there will be no more than 2 albums per any band. I want to try to give as many bands an opportunity here as I can. Okay, so without further ado, here we go. Number 10 is a band I discovered not too long ago, but I've been listening to this album a lot, and I've listened to all of their albums. I now own 2 of them, but I've listened to, I think there's 3 in the set, but this one I think is the best, and it just narrowly beat out 3 other albums to get this spot. I was going to go with one other album first, and then I thought, you know what, I just like this one better, and that's bottom line. Buffalo Springfield Again from Buffalo Springfield. So this album was released in 1967, I believe, 67. Yeah, I don't see it here, but I believe it was released in 1967. So number 10, Buffalo Springfield Again. Oh, I'm sorry about that. Number 9 comes from a duo that I like quite a bit. It's not going to be hard to figure out which one this is. This is an album I think is their best album by the 2 of them, and I really like a lot of the stuff on here. Just really good folky pop rock, pop rock songs. We're talking about Simon and Garfunkel's The Sound of Silence, I love both of their sounds of their vocals. I like almost everything on this album. To me, this is a really, really strong album. Yeah, they have all of their albums are pretty strong, but I chose to pick this one because I just think it's the best of them. So number 9, Simon and Garfunkel, The Sound of Silence from 1966 too. So the Beatles are up next with their Magical Mystery Tour, and that's from 1967. This is the 8th album. This has long been such a good album with so many psychedelic songs. Fool on the Hill, the Magical Mystery Tour, Strawberry Fields Forever, Baby You're a Rich Man. Yeah, I love these songs. This whole album is great. And then probably my favorite Beatles song from most of my young age years was I Am a Walrus. That's also present on this. So great album for number 8. Number 7 comes from one of my group of 8. I think this is, yes, this is the, oh no, I'm wrong. There are 2 albums on here from my group of 8, and this is the first of them. Tommy from The Who. There's a couple of other Who albums that I could have thrown in here. I just think this one is more cohesive than the others and is kind of the beginning of their album making years. The other stuff is just more of collections of songs and stuff. But this is a great album. Of course, it's considered one of the great opera, rock opera, whatever you want to call it, albums of all time. The first, many feel it's the first. Some would say Arthur by the Kinks might be first. There might be Sgt. Pepper's could be first. There are lots of different things on, but nevertheless, great album. Lots of classics on here. Pinball Wizard, Feel Me. What else is on here? Acid Queen is on here. Tommy, Can You Hear Me? Yeah, some really good stuff on here. Overture. Yeah, just fantastic album. So that's for number 7. Sorry. Number 6 from Hendrix. This is my favorite of his. I know many people prefer Are You Experienced? Some of them even prefer Electric Ladyland. But for me, this is the album. The first one I got. I love all the tracks on here. Up from the Sky, Spanish Castle Magic, fantastic. Little Wing is on here. If a 6 turned out to be a 9, yeah. You Got Me Floating Round and Round. And Castles Made of Sand is on here. Yeah. And then you got the sung song by Noel Redding, She's So Fine. And then you've got the last song on this, Axis Bull's Love, fantastic. This is a really strong, bluesy, rhythm and bluesy, heavy album. So that was number 6. Number 5. So the top 5 are, I think, distinctive against the bottom 5. So the bottom 5 are good albums. These next 5 are really great albums, I think. The Doors, Debut, This was the album that brought the Doors to me finally after 40 years. I do like almost everything on this. 20th Century Fox, fantastic. The Alabama Whiskey Bar song, really like that a lot too. Take It As It Comes, another really good song. And just full Light My Fires on here. Just a strong, strong, strong album in that number 5. And that was from 1967. Also, the Hendrix album was from 67, and The Who was from 69. I don't think I need to tell people that, but I'm telling them it anyways. So now we're down to the 4. These 4, I think, are the strongest 60s albums, and easily my favorite 4. And there's not much separating them except for maybe the top one. Anyways, Led Zeppelin 2, at one time, if we had done this when I was young, this would have easily been my favorite 60s album. Easily. It was at that time was my favorite Zeppelin album. Absolutely killer songs on this. Ramble On, one of the great rock songs of all time. Bring It On Home was a song I didn't really initially like on this album, but it grew on me quite a bit over time. The Lemon Song, of course. A Whole Lot of Love, of course, was probably the first track on here that I really loved. And I still like it, but it's overkilled. But Led Zeppelin 2 coming here at number 4 from 1969. Okay, next up, probably my favorite album by this band. I absolutely love this album. I think it's killer. If we'd done this 2 or 3 years ago, it might not even have been on here, but in the last 3 years, it's just really taken over. Revolver, I've done a few episodes. I've done a look back at a classic rock album with it. I've done it on a couple of other episodes as well. Just a killer album. I love the artwork. I love all the tracks on here. Taxman, Eleanor Rigby. These some great songs on this album. I believe my favorite is Tomorrow Never Knows, which is the last track. Just a killer album. I feel the Beatles reached a kind of pinnacle with this album, for me anyways, and I really enjoy it. So number 3, the Beatles, Revolver from 1966. Okay, from 1969, the number 2 album. I think between the Revolver and the Beatles, I was back and forth with the two, with this one. Stand Up by Jethro Tull. I think this is the absolute wonderful album. It's got a lot of that bluesy hints, but this is the beginning of that Jethro Tull sound. Some excellent tracks on here. Beret is on here. Nothing Is Easy is on here. Of course, Fat Man, which is the absolute classic. This is For 1,000 Minutes, For 1,000 Mothers. Really excellent album. I love the art on this as well. Another kind of penciled art here, same as the Beatles one. Just both of them really done well. Excellent. This is from 1969. Number 2, Jethro Tull's Stand Up. Number 1, I don't think this is going to come as a surprise to anybody. I think it easily wins this. I think this is one of the great and classic rock albums of all time. This album is in my masterpiece albums and will likely be one of my favorite albums of all time at some period of time when it's got a little more years behind it. But we're talking about In the Court of the Crimson King by King Crimson. Every track on here is fantastic. The album is well orchestrated. The cover is fantastic. The instrumentation is great. And it's a very unusual sound for that time period. I think it's one of the most unusual albums of its time period. I think it's ahead of its time in a lot of ways. Anyways, a great album, a great launching of a fantastic career for King Crimson and In the Court of the Crimson King from 1969. So we're just going to redo them. So In the Court of the Crimson King from King Crimson, number 1. Stand Up from Jethro Tull, number 2. The Beatles' Revolver, number 3. Led Zeppelin's 2, number 4. Sorry, it's kind of confusing, eh? The Doors' Debut, number 5. Jimi Hendrix, Axis Bold as Love. Jimi Hendrix and the Experience, Axis Bold as Love, is number 6. Number 7 is Tommy from The Who. Number 8 is another Beatles album, Magical Mystery Tour. They were the only ones to get 2. Number 9, Simon and Garfunkel, Sound of Silence. It's number 9. And the last, but certainly not least, and an album that I think will end up higher up than it is, Buffalo Springfield, again from Buffalo Springfield. So that's the top 10. My honorable mentions include the Beatles' Abbey Road, of course, and Sgt. Pepper's, both albums. You could go back to Hard Day's Night, you could go back to Help. All these are great albums, but all need to be mentioned here. Jimi Hendrix, Are You Experienced? You could even throw Electric Ladyland in there. I don't care for that one as much as the other two, but it's still a great album. CCR of Green River. This is an album that I've liked and I've tried to get and want to get, and I think once I get it, I think it'll make some impact here for me. The Byrds, Turn, 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 another great album. Tomorrow their Tomorrow album, which I really like. It's the Steve Howe beginnings for me. The Doors, LA Woman, another great album by The Doors. The Stones, Between the Buttons, which is waiting for its turn on my playlist. I think this may be my favorite of the 60 Stones albums. Pink Floyd, Saucer Full of Secrets, and more. But Saucer Full of Secrets especially was the kind of the last battle for that 10th spot with Buffalo Springfield. I almost put this one in, but I said to myself, which one of these, if I could only keep one of them, and I said I would keep the Buffalo Springfield one, so that's why it ended up in there. And then the last one that I want to mention here, Big Brother and the Holding Company's Cheap Thrills. I'm a big Janis Joplin fan. I do love her voice, and this is just absolutely a killer album. I just discovered it a couple months ago. Been looking for it. Just a great album, and I just think, given time, it could make a top 10 run here as well. So there you have it. The first episode of Decades is complete. Decades from the 1960s, my 10 favorite albums. I hope you enjoyed this. List your own 10 favorite albums below. I'm curious. There might be one or two in there I don't know, and maybe I'm going to go look at it. I know some people will say there's definitely going to be some... sorry, I'm drawing a blank here. I know there's going to be some albums in here that I am well aware of, but I haven't listened to, and maybe they're not quite my style yet. Maybe that might change. Obviously, Frank Zappa was proliferated with albums here, and I'd begun to kind of warm to him a bit. So, maybe come back in a year's time, maybe there will be a Frank Zappa album on here. Anyways, I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, please hit like and subscribe. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you don't miss any more. And we will see you in 2 weeks for another episode of Decades, which will be the 1970s. Take care. Goodbye.